No one warned Ethan Vale that saving a vampire princess would be easier than surviving what her palace did to him afterward. At 2:13 in the morning, he was alone in the emergency wing of Blackridge Border Hospital, standing under flickering fluorescent lights while rain hammered the windows hard enough to sound like thrown gravel. The place sat less than 2 miles from the Northern Treaty Line, where the United States ended in everything but name, and the old vampire dominion began behind pine forests, private roads, and warning signs nobody joked about. Ethan was not a soldier, not a hunter, not one of those famous diplomats who smiled for cameras after signing peace agreements they never had to enforce. He was a night shift trauma medic with tired eyes, a half-healed bruise on his jaw from a bar fight he had tried to break up, and a coffee habit strong enough to qualify as a medical condition. His uniform still smelled faintly of antiseptic, wet asphalt, and the cheap vending machine sandwich he had eaten for dinner while filling out paperwork nobody would read. Most nights, his job was ordinary in the worst possible way. Truckers with broken wrists, hikers with frostbite, college kids who thought mountain roads were made for speed, old men who drove themselves in because calling an ambulance felt like weakness. He liked ordinary. Ordinary had rules. Ordinary had forms. Ordinary did not arrive behind a motorcade of black SUVs with tinted windows and guards who carried themselves like they had never once needed to raise their voices. The first warning came when every light in the hospital dimmed at the same time. Not went out. Dimmed, as if the building itself had lowered its head. Ethan looked up from the intake desk, pen frozen between his fingers, and heard the front doors unlock with a heavy metallic click even though no one had touched them. Nurse Carla, who had worked nights for 23 years and claimed nothing scared her anymore, slowly reached for the cross she wore under her scrubs. "Ethan," she whispered, "don't move." Through the rain-blurred glass, he saw them. 4 black vehicles rolled into the ambulance bay without headlights, their tires whispering over the wet pavement. No sirens, no radio call, no request for clearance, just presence. The security guard at the entrance stepped forward, then stopped as the first passenger door opened. A woman in white armor stepped out beneath the overhang, tall and pale, her silver hair braided down her back, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses despite the hour. She did not look like a patient. She looked like a verdict. Behind her, 2 more figures moved with the same unnerving grace, carrying a covered stretcher between them. The sheet over it was deep red, not from anything graphic, but ceremonial, embroidered with black thread in the shape of a crown split by a thorn. Ethan knew that symbol from the mandatory hospital training videos, the ones everyone treated like outdated Cold War drills until the room became too quiet. House Vare, Royal Bloodline, Vampire Dominion. Do not touch without consent. Do not expose to sunlight. Do not offer human blood under any circumstance. The woman in white removed her glasses, and her crimson eyes found Ethan through the glass as if the walls between them were meaningless. Then the doors opened by themselves. Cold air swept into the lobby, carrying the scent of rain, iron, and winter roses. The guards entered first, scanning the room with beautiful, terrifying calm, and every human instinct in Ethan's body told him to stay behind the desk, follow protocol, wait for someone important. But the stretcher passed under the lobby lights, and the sheet slipped just enough for him to see a hand hanging over the side. Small, pale, trembling. A silver bracelet circled the wrist, set with a single dark jewel pulsing weakly like a heartbeat losing its rhythm. Ethan's pen fell from his hand. The woman in white spoke in a voice so controlled it was almost colder than silence. "We require a physician with clearance." Carla swallowed. "The on-call surgeon is 20 minutes out. She does not have 20 minutes. The words changed the room. Not louder, not panicked, just final. Ethan stepped around the desk before he could talk himself out of it. "I'm a medic," he said. "I can stabilize her until the doctor gets here." Every vampire in the lobby turned toward him. Their attention felt like stepping onto thin ice and hearing it crack beneath his shoes. The woman in white studied his face, his ordinary badge, his tired hands, the human pulse beating visibly in his throat. "Do you understand who is on this stretcher?" Ethan looked down as the red sheet was drawn back. The girl beneath it could not have been more than 20 by human appearance, dressed in torn royal fabric darkened by rain, a black crystal crown tangled in her white blonde hair. Her lips moved without sound, and when her eyes opened, they were not monstrous. They were terrified. Ethan forgot the training video. He forgot the treaty line. He forgot every warning written in bold red letters. He only saw someone dying in front of him, while everyone powerful enough to command nations stood frozen by laws they were too afraid to break. He took one step closer and said, "I understand she needs help." The princess's eyes locked on his, and somewhere deep inside the hospital walls, an alarm began to ring. The alarm did not sound like any medical warning Ethan had ever heard. It was too low, too old, a deep pulse that rolled through the walls of Blackridge Border Hospital and made the glass doors tremble in their frames. Every monitor in the emergency wing flickered from green to red, then displayed the same 3 words in block letters: Royal Blood Event. Nurse Carla backed away from the stretcher as if the words themselves could reach out and pull her into something no human was meant to survive. Ethan stayed where he was, one hand hovering inches above the princess's wrist, close enough to feel the unnatural cold rising from her skin. The woman in white armor stepped between him and the stretcher so fast he barely saw her move. "No human contact without sovereign permission," she said. "That is treaty law." Ethan looked past her shoulder at the princess. The young woman's eyes were open, but barely. Crimson light came and went inside them like a candle fighting wind. "Then get permission." The armored woman's jaw tightened. "Her father is dead. Her mother is beyond the treaty line. Her council is scattered. Until dawn, no one may authorize intervention." The answer made no sense and too much sense at the same time. Ethan had worked border medicine long enough to know how bureaucracy could kill a person while everyone stood around claiming their hands were tied. He heard it in human hospitals, insurance calls, county approvals, missing signatures, wrong stamps, right patient, wrong door. But this was worse, because the people surrounding the stretcher were not lazy or careless. They were terrified of breaking a law older than their own loyalty. The princess tried to lift her hand, failed, and the dark jewel at her wrist flashed once. The room temperature dropped so sharply that Ethan saw his breath. One of the overhead lights burst in a harmless shower of sparks, and a little boy waiting with his mother near the vending machines began to cry. That sound cut through Ethan more sharply than the alarm. "Move her into trauma 1, he said. No one moved. The guards looked to the woman in white. The woman in white looked at Ethan as if he had just offered to walk into a thunderstorm holding a metal pole. "Human medic, you do not command this room." "No," Ethan said, gripping the side rail of the stretcher. "But she is in my emergency department." For one impossible second, nobody breathed. Then Carla, pale but steady, stepped forward and grabbed the other rail. "Trauma 1 is clear," she said. "If they are going to arrest us, they can do it after we try." Ethan felt a flicker of gratitude so strong it almost made him smile. Almost. The woman in white stared at Carla, then at Ethan, then finally gave a short nod. The guards guided the stretcher down the hall with silent precision, their boots making no sound on the polished floor. As they moved, every patient door cracked open. Faces appeared in the dim hallway. A trucker with a bandaged arm, an elderly woman wrapped in a blanket, a teenager holding an ice pack against his cheek. People who had come in expecting normal pain now watched a royal vampire princess pass beneath buzzing American hospital lights, while ancient guards followed like shadows from another century. Inside Trauma 1, Ethan forced himself back into rhythm. Rhythms saved lives. Gloves, warm blankets, oxygen ready but not forced. Monitors connected with careful spacing because no one had trained him on vampire biology beyond a thin booklet and a half-hour seminar taught by a lawyer. The princess's name came from the woman in white only after Ethan asked twice. Princess Seraphine Vare. The name changed the air. Even Carla flinched. Ethan had heard it on the news 3 months earlier, when peace talks collapsed after an attack near the treaty line. Seraphine Vare, the last daughter of the oldest vampire house in North America, rumored to be brilliant, ruthless, and untouchable. Now she lay on a hospital bed under a heated blanket with rainwater in her hair and one hand curled weakly around nothing. Ethan leaned close enough for her to hear, but not close enough to frighten her. "Princess, my name is Ethan Vale. I am going to help you breathe easier, check your vitals, and keep you warm. I will not do anything without telling you first." Her lashes trembled. "Human." The word was barely there. "Yes. You should run." Carla stopped unwrapping a sterile kit. The woman in white lowered her eyes, and for the first time Ethan saw something under her discipline that looked painfully human. Grief. Why? Ethan asked softly. Seraphine's gaze drifted toward the ceiling. Because they followed me. A distant thud shook the hospital from somewhere outside. Not an explosion, not something graphic or loud enough to shatter windows, but heavy, deliberate, like a giant fist striking the earth. The guards reacted instantly, forming a half circle between the door and the bed. Ethan looked at the monitor. The readings made no sense, but the trend did. She was fading. The dark jewel at her wrist pulsed again, weaker now, and a thin ring of frost spread across the metal bed rail beneath her hand. The woman in white spoke without looking away from the door. The house that attacked her cannot cross the threshold while she remains legally unclaimed. They are bound by royal custom. But if her life force drops below the inheritance line, they can challenge the room itself. Challenge the room, Ethan repeated. That is not a medical term. It means, she said, that everyone in this hospital becomes part of the dispute. Carla whispered something under her breath that sounded like a prayer and a complaint at the same time. Ethan looked through the small window in the door. Down the hall, security shutters were lowering over the lobby glass. Outside, red light moved through the rain where there should have been only ambulance bay lamps. Patients were being guided away by nurses who did not understand what was happening but understood danger well enough to move quickly. Then Seraphine's hand closed around Ethan's sleeve. It should have been impossible. She had barely been able to speak, yet her fingers held the fabric with sudden, desperate strength. Her eyes found his again, clearer now, full of pain held behind royal discipline. Do not let them take me back. There it was. Not a command. Not a queenly demand. A request. Ethan felt the entire old world pressing against that one sentence. Treaties, bloodlines, ancient houses, political consequences, all of it trying to convince him that a night shift medic should lower his eyes and step aside. He thought of the little boy crying in the lobby. He thought of the patients behind half-closed doors. He thought of the way Seraphine had told him to run before asking him to stay. He placed his hand gently over hers, not as a claim, not as a vow, just enough for her to know he had heard. Nobody is taking you anywhere tonight, he said. The monitors screamed. The jewel on her wrist went dark. Every vampire guard in the room turned toward Ethan at once, and the woman in white whispered, Medic, whatever you are going to do, decide now. The moment the dark jewel went silent, the room changed from a hospital room into a courtroom where no one had agreed on the law. The monitors screamed in sharp electronic bursts. The overhead lights flickered, and a thin white mist curled across the floor from beneath Seraphine's bed. Ethan reached for the crash cart on instinct, then stopped because every human procedure he knew suddenly felt like trying to fix a spacecraft with a pocket knife. Princess Seraphine's hand slipped from his sleeve, her fingers falling open against the blanket. With terrifying softness, the woman in white armor stepped back as if the air around the bed had become sacred. The inheritance line has failed, she whispered. No, Ethan said, because it was the only word his mind could find. She still has a pulse. That is not what I mean. Outside Trauma 1, something struck the locked security shutters hard enough to rattle dust from the ceiling tiles. A nurse shouted down the hall. A child cried again, farther away now, being moved toward the interior stairwell. Carla looked from the door to Ethan, waiting for an order neither of them had been trained to give. Ethan forced himself to breathe through his nose. Antiseptic. Cold metal. Burned wiring from the broken light. Winter roses from the vampire guards. Seraphine's skin had gone paler, almost translucent beneath the hospital glow, and yet her face held a strange dignity, even unconscious, as if royalty remained when strength did not. Tell me what she needs, Ethan said. The woman in white did not answer. Her crimson eyes moved to the blood cooler near the wall, then away with visible shame. Ethan followed her gaze. Blood, he said. She needs blood. One of the guards spoke for the first time, his voice low and urgent. Not stored blood. Not animal blood. Not synthetic. Carla froze. Then what kind? Silence answered before anyone did. Ethan felt his own heartbeat become suddenly too loud. The woman in white turned toward him slowly. Living human blood can restore a royal vampire in collapse, but the blood law forbids it. After the treaty wars, no royal may drink directly from a human within neutral territory. Not for healing. Not for survival. Not even by consent. Why? Ethan asked, though he already hated the shape of the answer. Because royal blood does not take without giving back. It creates a bond the old courts recognize as sacred, political, personal, permanent unless dissolved by both sovereign houses. Another impact rolled through the hospital. The window in the trauma room door flashed red, and for half a second Ethan saw silhouettes gathering beyond the hall shutters, tall and still in the rain-washed darkness. Seraphine's enemies had not entered, but the building felt aware of them, as if every wall was listening for permission to be afraid. Ethan looked back at Seraphine. So she dies because the law is inconvenient. The woman in white flinched. She dies because if she drinks from you, Housefair may claim you as royal consort by dawn. Her enemies will call it contamination. Your government will call it a treaty violation. My court will call it destiny or treason, depending on who benefits first. Ethan almost laughed, but there was no humor in him. I asked what she needs medically. Medically, the woman said, voice breaking only at the edge, she needs you. Carla whispered, Ethan. He looked at her. In her face, he saw every reasonable argument. He had student loans, a sister in Denver who still called every Sunday, a life full of ordinary small problems that did not include becoming the center of a vampire succession crisis. He saw the hospital administrator blaming him, federal agents questioning him, vampire nobles deciding whether his kindness counted as insult or invitation. Then Seraphine stirred. Her lips parted around a breath, so faint the monitor nearly missed it. No, she whispered. Ethan leaned closer. Princess. Her eyes opened just enough to find him, and the fear there was clearer than the pain. Do not give them your life for mine. The words struck harder than the impacts outside. She knew. Even half gone, she knew what the bond would cost. She was not reaching for him like a predator. She was warning him like someone who had already lost too much to ancient laws written by people who never had to pay for them. Ethan's hand tightened around the bed rail. This was the choice, then. Not heroic in the way movies made choices look. No swelling music, no certainty, no clean promise that everything would be fine. Just a tired medic in a freezing trauma room, a dying princess who had told him to run twice, and a hallway full of innocent people trapped between two worlds. He thought of all the rules he had sworn to follow when he first put on the uniform. Preserve life. Do no harm. Treat the patient in front of you. He had never imagined those words would stand against royal law, ancient blood custom, and a political disaster waiting for sunrise. How much? He asked. The woman in white closed her eyes. Enough to wake her. Not enough to endanger you if she stops when told. Will she be able to stop? The room went terribly quiet. Seraphine answered before anyone else could. I will. Her voice was barely a thread, but it carried something unbroken. Ethan nodded once, then rolled up his sleeve with hands that shook only after the decision had already been made. Carla grabbed his wrist. You are sure? He met her eyes. No, but I am sure what happens if I do nothing. The woman in white drew a small ceremonial blade from her belt, then hesitated as Ethan pulled away. No, he said gently. This is a hospital. We do it clean. He took a sterile lancet from the tray, the kind used 100 times a night for routine tests, absurdly small against the weight of what it was about to begin. He cleaned his wrist, felt the cold sting of alcohol, and lowered himself beside the bed so Seraphine would not have to rise far. Her eyes filled with crimson light, not hunger alone, but horror, gratitude, and a loneliness so old it made Ethan's chest ache. Ethan Vale, she whispered, saying his full name as if memorizing it before a storm. If I survive this, they will not let you remain ordinary. He looked at the frost fading and returning along the bed rail, at the door trembling under another distant strike, at the princess trying to refuse salvation because she cared what it would do to him. Then survive first, he said. We can argue about ordinary later. The lancet clicked. A single red bead rose against his skin, bright under the hospital lights. Every vampire guard dropped to one knee at once, not to Ethan, not yet, but to the law waking in the room. Seraphine's hand closed around his wrist with impossible care, and as her lips touched the offering he had chosen to give, every alarm in Blackridge Border Hospital went silent. For 3 seconds, nothing happened, and Ethan thought the ancient world had lied. Seraphine's hand remained wrapped around his wrist with feather-like care, her face still too pale beneath the emergency lights, her breathing too faint to trust. Then the first change came through the floor. A low pulse moved under the hospital tiles, not like an earthquake, not like machinery, but like a heartbeat large enough to belong to the building itself. The monitors that had gone silent woke one by one, but they did not show numbers anymore. They showed a crest Ethan had only seen on warning documents, a black thorned crown surrounded by a ring of red light. Carla took one step back. The woman in white armor bowed her head, as if she had been waiting her whole life for a miracle and dreading it at the same time. "It has accepted the exchange," she whispered. Ethan tried to ask what had accepted it, but Seraphine released his wrist before he could speak. There was no dramatic wound, no gruesome mark, only a small clean spot where the lancet had touched him and a thin line of warmth moving under his skin like sunlight through water. Seraphine inhaled sharply. Frost vanished from the bed rail. Color returned to her lips in a soft rush, and her eyes opened fully, crimson bright and terrifyingly alive. For the first time, Ethan understood why nations signed treaties around beings like her. Even weak, even lying under a hospital blanket with rainwater still drying in her hair, she carried the kind of presence that made a room remember its place. Then she looked at him, and all that royal power folded around something painfully human. "You should not have done that," she said. Her voice was stronger now, low and clear, with an accent that sounded older than any American city. Ethan leaned back against the supply cabinet, suddenly lightheaded. "People keep telling me that after I do things." Carla moved toward him with a blood pressure cuff, her practical instincts fighting their way through shock.
"You're critical.
"Sit down before you fall down, hero."
I can't.
"Not a hero,"
You need to go.
Ethan murmured.
No, I'm not
But he
leaving
sat
you. We'll
because
find
the
a way
room
out."
tilted slightly when he tried not to. Seraphine pushed herself upright. Every guard reacted as if the moon had risen indoors. The woman in white dropped to one knee beside the bed. "Your Highness, Mara,"
Chào mừng đến
Seraphine
với sự
said,
kết thúc.
naming her at last.
Kết thúc cho các
"How many
người."
civilians
I
remain
told you
in
to
the
stay out of
building?"
my way.
Mara looked,
You don't have that authority
startled by the
anymore.
question. "Lower floor patients are being
He's not
moved
wrong.
to the storm shelter.
Watch me.
Staff are sealing
Manoli?
the inner corridors. The attackers remain outside the threshold. They are not attackers anymore." Seraphine's gaze
Manoli.
shifted toward the door,
Their
and the
fate
red
is
light in the
sealed.
narrow window seemed to pull back as if it had noticed
We
her
cannot
watching.
allow this
They are
darkness
witnesses.
to consume us.
Ethan rubbed his wrist,
you all.
where the warmth
We
had become a
appreciate your
faint
sacrifice.
circular glow beneath the
Now,
skin.
we must
Witnesses
continue.
to what?
Let's go.
No one answered quickly enough. That frightened him
They're
more
waiting.
than the impacts outside had. Seraphine turned to him,
We're
and for the
ready for
first
them.
time since she had arrived,
Be
uncertainty
careful.
passed across her face. Not weakness, not fear for herself, fear for him. Ethan Vale, when a royal vampire receives living blood freely given in neutral ground, the old law wakes. It does not only heal, it records intent. "Intent," he repeated. "I intended for you not to die." "The law is older than plain speech," Mara said quietly. "It reads protection as loyalty, blood as covenant, refusal to abandon as claim." The word claim landed in the room like a gavel. Carla looked between them. "Absolutely not. He is a hospital employee. He has a badge. He has a terrible car in the parking lot. He is not part of some medieval engagement ritual." Ethan would have laughed if Seraphine had not looked so stricken. "Carla," he said, "maybe let the vampire princess explain before you argue with the magical heart monitor." Seraphine's lips almost curved. Then the expression vanished as the ceiling lights dimmed again. The red crest on the monitors sharpened. Letters formed beneath it in an elegant script that somehow translated itself in Ethan's mind. Blood received. Life restored. Bond recognized. Mara lowered her forehead to the floor. The guards followed. Even the air seemed to kneel. Ethan stood too fast and immediately regretted it. Recognized by who? By House Vare, Seraphine said. By the old royal court. By any noble who still honors the first laws. Another sound rolled through the hall, but this time it came from inside the hospital. Doors opening. Not the trauma room door, but the sealed hallway beyond it. Ethan crossed to the window and saw the lobby cameras flicker back onto the wall screen. The ambulance bay outside was filled with figures standing in the rain, their black coats moving in the wind. They were not advancing now. They were bowing. All of them. Heads lowered toward the hospital entrance as if the brick building had become a palace. Carla whispered, "Why are they doing that?" Seraphine swung her legs over the side of the bed. Mara reached to stop her, but Seraphine's glance froze the gesture in midair. Because if they continue the challenge now, they are not attacking an unclaimed princess. They are attacking a bonded royal pair under sanctuary. Ethan stared at her. A bonded what? The hallway lights snapped from red to white. The hospital intercom hissed. Then a voice came through, smooth, ancient, and furious enough to chill every breath in the room. Princess Seraphine Vare, by Dawn Court authority, present the human who has entered your bloodline. Mara arose with a look of pure alarm. Lord Cashin. Seraphine's hand tightened around the blanket. My uncle. Ethan felt the warmth in his wrist flare once, and Seraphine's gaze dropped to it with a sadness that made his anger arrive before his fear. He led them here? He wanted me unable to inherit, she said. But now he has a different problem. The intercom crackled again. Present him, or every treaty official in this state will hear that House Vare has bound a human without witness, without counsel, and without consent. Carla snapped. He consented to save a patient, not join a royal family. Seraphine looked at Ethan then, not as a princess commanding a subject, but as a woman standing at the edge of a choice that could ruin them both. She's right. I can deny the bond before dawn. It may protect your life, though it will weaken my claim and give Cashin room to challenge me. Ethan looked past her to the hallway screen, where vampires bowed in the rain while human nurses guided patients to safety behind fire doors. He thought about going back to ordinary, about his terrible car, his unpaid bills, his sister's Sunday calls. Then he thought about Seraphine warning him twice, even when saving herself would have been easier. If you deny it, he asked, what happens to the people in this hospital? Mara answered when Seraphine did not. They become leverage again. The room went quiet except for the rain tapping against the windows. Ethan picked up his hospital jacket from the chair and pulled it on over his scrubs, though he had no idea why. Maybe because ordinary armor was still armor if it was all you had. Then we do not deny it in a room full of scared people, he said. We make him say what he wants where everyone can hear. Seraphine stared at him, and the crimson in her eyes softened into something dangerously close to hope. You do not understand court warfare. No, Ethan said, walking toward the door as the mark on his wrist glowed beneath his sleeve. But I understand bullies. Behind him, the royal guards rose as one. The trauma room door unlocked by itself, and when Ethan stepped into the hallway beside the vampire princess he had saved, every security camera in Blackridge Border Hospital turned to watch. The hallway outside Trauma 1 had never felt longer than it did with every camera turning toward Ethan at once. Their small black lenses followed him from the ceiling corners, blinking red in silent judgment, broadcasting his uneven steps to the nurses in the storm shelter, the guards in the lobby, the figures waiting in the rain, and whatever officials were already waking up to emergency calls across the treaty line. Seraphine walked beside him without touching him, but the space between them felt charged, as if an invisible thread stretched from the glow beneath his sleeve to the crimson light returning in her eyes. She was still weak. Ethan could see it in the careful way she carried her shoulders, the slight pause before each breath, the way Mara stayed half a step behind her with one hand near a hidden weapon she did not draw. Yet the hospital changed around Seraphine as she moved. The emergency lights steadied. The frost retreated from the walls. Even the old linoleum seemed brighter under her bare feet, as if royalty was not a title but a weather system. Carla walked on Ethan's other side with a blanket in her arms and a look that dared any immortal noble to comment on proper patient discharge procedure. For the record, she muttered, this is the worst night shift I have ever worked. Ethan kept his eyes on the lobby doors ahead. Worse than the bus crash during the ice storm. That bus did not come with a royal engagement crisis. Fair. Seraphine glanced at them, and for half a second something almost warm touched her expression. Then the lobby opened before them, and warmth disappeared. The front of Blackridge Border Hospital had become a border court without permission. Human patients and staff watched from behind the reinforced fire doors at the far corridor. Vampire guards lined the walls like living statues. Outside the glass, dozens of nobles stood under the rain in dark formal coats, their faces pale and unreadable, their eyes reflecting the hospital lights. None crossed the threshold. In the center of the ambulance bay, beneath the overhang, stood a man who looked enough like Seraphine to make Ethan's skin tighten. Lord Cashin Vare wore a black coat with silver embroidery and no sign of the storm touching him. Rain slid around him instead of onto him, as if even water had accepted his authority. His hair was white blonde, his posture elegant, his smile gentle in the way a locked door could be gentle. "My niece," he said through the intercom, though the doors were closed. "You stand. That is good news for the house." Seraphine stopped 10 feet from the glass. "You do not get to speak of the house after sending assassins to neutral ground." Ethan felt the lobby react before anyone spoke. Vampire guard stiffened. Human staff exchanged frightened looks. Cashin placed one hand over his heart with theatrical sadness. A dangerous accusation from a princess whose judgment appears compromised. His gaze shifted to Ethan, and the air seemed to narrow around him. This is the human? Ethan had been stared at by angry patients, drunk bikers, grieving families, and one county sheriff who hated paperwork. None of them had ever made him feel like a specimen under glass. He forced himself not to look away. "Ethan Vale," he said. "Night shift medic." Cashin smiled wider. "How charmingly modest." Seraphine's voice hardened. "He saved my life." "Yes, by violating the blood law." Cashin lifted his hand, and one of the nobles behind him raised a silver tablet, its screen glowing with ancient script and modern legal seals. "Before witness and court, I submit that Princess Seraphine Vare has entered an unlawful bond with a human employee of a neutral facility, without council review, without diplomatic notice, and under medical confusion. Her claim to succession is therefore suspended until this contamination is examined." Carla took one step forward before Ethan could stop her. "Contamination?" He gave informed consent to a life-saving procedure. Cashin's eyes slid to her. "And you are the nurse who will make your afterlife very inconvenient if you call my medic contaminated again." A stunned silence spread through both sides of the glass. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, half horrified, half grateful. Seraphine did not smile, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her. Cashin's expression cooled. Human humor is often mistaken for courage. So is cruelty for tradition, Ethan said before he could think better of it. Every vampire in the lobby turned to him. Cashin's attention sharpened with real interest now. "You believe you understand tradition, Mr. Vale?" "No. I understand what I saw. She came in dying. Everyone knew what would save her. Everyone was too afraid of your rules to help. So I made a choice. A choice that binds you to a royal bloodline. Then maybe your law recognized the one person in the room willing to act like her life mattered." The words left him, and only afterward did Ethan realize his wrist was glowing brighter beneath his sleeve. Seraphine looked at him, not shocked exactly, but shaken in a way no attack had managed. Cashin saw it too. His smile vanished. "Careful, human. The court loves sentiment until it becomes evidence." He raised his voice, and the intercom carried it through every speaker in the hospital. "Princess Seraphine, deny the bond now, and I will allow the hospital to remain neutral. Keep this human at your side, and every noble house will know you chose a border medic over your blood duty." Seraphine's face went still. Ethan felt the invisible thread between them tighten, not forcing him, not pulling him, simply reminding him that the choice was no longer his alone. She turned toward the fire doors where patients watched through narrow windows, then toward Mara and the kneeling guards, then finally toward Ethan. In her eyes he saw the wound beneath the crown, a lifetime of being valued as lineage, treaty piece, royal symbol, anything except a person whose survival mattered. "You can walk away," she said softly, too softly for the intercom, only for him. "If I deny it, you may still have a life." Ethan looked down at his shoes, wet from melted frost, and rain tracked across the lobby floor. Ordinary shoes. Ordinary man. Terrible car outside. Sister in Denver. Bills on the kitchen table. A world that would never understand what had happened in this hospital before dawn. Then he looked at the princess who had tried to protect him from the cost of saving her. "I already have a life," he said. "I am deciding what kind of man gets to live it." Seraphine's breath caught. Across the glass, Cashin waited with the patience of a trap. Seraphine stepped closer to Ethan, still not touching him, and faced the cameras. When she spoke, her voice filled the lobby without needing the speakers. "By the first law of House Vare, by blood freely given and life freely restored, I recognize Ethan Vale as my royal mate under sanctuary until dawn court judgment." Outside, Every noble in the reign dropped to one knee except Cashin. Inside, the human staff stared as the hospital monitors flared with the thorned crown crest. Ethan felt the glow on his wrist burn warm, not painful, but undeniable. Cashin's face became perfectly calm, which somehow frightened Ethan more than anger would have. Then Dawn Court will convene, Cashin said, and by sunrise, we will decide whether your human savior is a consort, a criminal, or the reason House Vare falls. Dawn Court did not arrive with trumpets or robes or anything Ethan would have recognized as a legal proceeding. It arrived through ringing phones, sealed black vehicles, emergency government tablets, and the hospital lobby, transforming into the most dangerous waiting room in North America. By 4:07 in the morning, Blackridge Border Hospital was surrounded by state troopers, federal treaty officers, vampire nobles, and news helicopters circling at a distance where their cameras could not quite see through the rain. The storm had softened into a cold drizzle, but the sky remained dark, holding back sunrise like the world itself was waiting to hear a verdict. Ethan sat on a plastic chair behind the nurse's station with a paper cup of water in his hand and the glowing mark on his wrist hidden under a folded towel. He had never felt less royal in his life. His sneakers squeaked when he shifted. His scrub top had a coffee stain near the collar. His hospital badge still showed a photo from 4 years ago when he had more sleep and fewer questions from immortal politicians. Across from him, Seraphine stood near the lobby windows speaking quietly with Mara and 2 federal treaty officials in gray coats. She had refused a wheelchair, refused another blanket, and refused to let anyone move Ethan out of sight. She looked stronger now, but not safe. Power had returned to her like fire returning to a lantern, contained but unmistakable. Every vampire noble in the lobby watched her with a mixture of reverence, fear, and calculation. Every human official watched Ethan as if he were a bomb someone had accidentally placed in the middle of a peace treaty. Carla dropped into the chair beside him and handed him a granola bar from her pocket. Eat. Ethan stared at it. I am pretty sure I am too nervous to digest. Eat anyway. You are about to be judged by people who look like they do not believe in snacks. He unwrapped it because arguing with Carla had always been a losing strategy. The first bite tasted like cardboard and honey. At the far end of the lobby, Lord Cashin entered without asking permission. The automatic doors did not open for him until a federal officer keyed them manually, and Ethan took a small amount of comfort in seeing an ancient noble forced to wait on hospital security. Cashin stepped inside with 4 witnesses behind him, each dressed in black court attire, each carrying a silver case. The vampire nobles already in the lobby bowed their heads. The human officials did not. That tiny refusal seemed to amuse Cashin. How democratic, he said softly. A federal building, a county hospital, and an ancient royal claim all under one leaking roof. Seraphine faced him from the center of the lobby. State your challenge. Cashin looked at Ethan. Gladly. I challenged the legitimacy of the bond on 3 grounds. First, the human did not understand the royal consequence. Second, the princess was medically compromised and therefore unable to accept with full authority. Third, the exchange occurred in neutral territory, placing every human institution present at risk of political contamination. Carla made a sound that promised future trouble. Ethan held up one hand before she could start a diplomatic incident with a granola bar wrapper. A treaty official, a calm woman named Director Hale, raised her tablet. For the record, Mr. Vale was informed that the procedure would create a recognized bond. Informed by panic, Cashin said. Not educated by law. He was also informed that refusal would likely result in Princess Seraphine's death. Cashin's smile sharpened. Tragic circumstances do not create valid monarchy. Seraphine's eyes glowed brighter, but she did not move. Ethan saw the effort it took. She was not afraid of Cashin. She was afraid of giving him the reaction he wanted. The court witnesses opened their silver cases. Inside each lay a black crystal shard mounted in metal. The shards began to hum, and the lobby lights dimmed until the hospital looked half submerged in moonlight. Mara leaned close to Ethan. Truth stones. They record sworn statements and blood intention. Great, Ethan whispered. The vampire version of a lie detector. Much less forgiving. Cashin extended one hand toward the largest shard. Call the human. Every eye turned. Ethan stood, his knees stiff, his heart trying to climb out of his chest. He walked to the center of the lobby and stopped beside Seraphine, close enough to feel the chill around her and the warmth answering from his wrist. Cashin circled him slowly, elegant and patient. "Mr. Vale, when you gave your blood, did you intend to marry my niece?" No, the crystal flashed clear. A ripple moved through the room. Cashin nodded as if he had expected victory to be simple. "Did you intend to gain rank, influence, protection, or wealth from House Vare?" No, the crystal flashed clear again. Human officials began typing. Vampire nobles exchanged silent glances. Cashin's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did you understand that your choice could place this hospital, your government, and our court under strain?" Ethan took a breath. "Not all of it. I understood enough to know people were using politics as an excuse to let someone die." The crystal did not flash clear. It flared red and gold, bright enough to make everyone look away. Mara inhaled sharply. Seraphine turned toward Ethan with astonishment she could not hide. Cashin stopped circling. "That color means nothing," he said. One of the older court witnesses bowed his head. "My lord, it means protective intent recognized by first law." The lobby shifted, not physically, but socially, like 1,000 invisible chairs scraping back at once. Cashin's challenge had been built on the idea that Ethan was ignorant, manipulated, or ambitious. The stone had called him something worse for Cashin: sincere. Director Hale looked up from her tablet. "The human legal record will note that consent was medically informed and morally voluntary." "Morally voluntary is not a royal category," Cashin snapped. Seraphine stepped forward. "It is now evidence." For the first time, anger showed in Cashin's face. "You would hang your crown on a human conscience." "No," Seraphine said. "I would hang it on the law you forced us to awaken." The oldest witness lifted his crystal shard, and its glow spread across the lobby floor in a circle around Ethan and Seraphine. "By first law, the bond is valid under sanctuary until dawn judgment. Challenge may continue only by proving corruption, coercion, or hidden betrayal." Cashin's expression smoothed again, but Ethan caught the flicker behind his eyes. The man still had a weapon, just not the one he had planned to use. Outside, the news helicopters drifted closer as the rain thinned. On the wall television above the vending machines, a muted breaking news banner appeared. "Border hospital lockdown linked to royal vampire succession dispute." Ethan stared at it, suddenly dizzy for reasons that had nothing to do with blood loss. His sister in Denver watched early news before work. His name was not on the screen yet, but it would be. Seraphine noticed where he was looking, and her face softened with guilt. "I am sorry," she whispered. Ethan wanted to say it was fine. It was not fine. Nothing about this was fine. But before he could answer, Cashin raised 2 fingers, and one of his witnesses produced a small, clear vial from a silver case. Inside floated a dark fragment of crystal, pulsing weakly with the same rhythm Seraphine's bracelet had lost before Ethan saved her. Mara went very still. Seraphine's eyes widened. Cashin smiled at last, gentle as a closing trap. "Then let us discuss hidden betrayal," he said. "Because the princess did not collapse from injury, exhaustion, or enemy pursuit. She was poisoned by bloodline magic from inside House Vare. And the only person whose new bond can reveal the traitor is the human she has just claimed." The vial in Cashin's hand turned every breath in the lobby into a decision. No one spoke at first. Even the news helicopters outside seemed to fade behind the rain, their distant thrum swallowed by the low hum of the truth stones. Ethan stared at the dark crystal fragment floating inside the glass and felt the warmth in his wrist answer it with a slow, uncomfortable pulse. It was not pain. It was recognition, and that frightened him more. Seraphine moved before anyone else did, one step toward Cashin, her face carved from royal discipline. "Where did you get that?" Cashin held the vial higher, letting the hospital lights catch the black shimmer inside. "From the hem of your travel cloak after your guards carried you through the treaty line. Bloodline poison leaves no mark ordinary physicians can read, but it leaves memory." Mara turned sharply toward one of the Vare guards by the wall. "You searched her belongings?" "I preserved evidence," Cashin replied. "Evidence you somehow failed to find, Captain." "Mara." The accusation landed with cruel precision. Several nobles looked toward Mara. She did not flinch, but Ethan saw her hands curl at her sides. Seraphine's voice dropped colder. "Do not speak to her as if loyalty is something you understand." Cashin's smile returned. Loyalty is exactly what we are discussing. Someone close enough to handle your royal seal placed a sleeping curse inside your bloodstone bracelet. Someone wanted you weak before you reached the human hospital. Someone knew your compassion would make you seek neutral care instead of returning to court. And now, by convenient miracle, a human medic stands bonded to you before dawn. The implications spread fast. Ethan heard it in the sudden whispers behind the fire doors, felt it in the way federal officers glanced at one another, saw it in the vampire nobles studying him with new suspicion. He had gone from outsider to proof to possible weapon in less than an hour. Carla stood from her chair. Do not even try to blame him. He did not know she existed before tonight. Cashin turned to her with polite patience. I am not blaming him yet. Ethan hated the word yet. Director Hale stepped between the two sides, tablet held tight against her coat. If the poison came from inside House Vare, this becomes a treaty security matter. You will surrender the evidence for joint review. With respect, Director, Cashin said, sounding anything but respectful. Human review cannot read blood memory. The bond can. Every face turned to Ethan again. Seraphine's expression changed first, anger giving way to alarm. No, Cashin tilted his head. You know the law. I know that blood memory can overwhelm a human mind. Temporarily. Or permanently, if the bond is unstable. Ethan looked between them. Would somebody explain what kind of vampire court nightmare I have been volunteered for? Mara answered quietly, though her eyes never left Cashin. Because you gave blood freely and she accepted, your bond carries an echo of what poisoned her. If you touch the fragment, you may see the chain of contact. The hand that planted it. The room. The moment. May, Ethan said. That is doing a lot of work. Yes, Mara admitted. Cashin's voice softened, dangerous in its gentleness. Of course, you may refuse. No one can compel a bonded human under sanctuary. But refusal would leave the court to interpret silence. And silence, unfortunately, often resembles guilt. Seraphine faced the gathered nobles. He owes this court nothing. He owes you survival, Cashin said. Unless his kindness ends where risk begins. Ethan felt that one in his chest because Cashin knew exactly where to aim. Not at pride, not at courage, at the quiet fear that maybe the moral choice had only been easy when the consequences were still abstract. He looked at Seraphine. She was watching him with the same intensity as when she had begged him not to save her. Not commanding, not pleading, giving him room to refuse even if refusal hurt her. That space mattered. It made the choice his. Ethan held out his hand. What happens if I see something I should not? Cashin answered too quickly. Then truth benefits us all. I was not asking you. Mara stepped closer. You may see emotions that are not yours. Memories without context. Fear, anger, desire for power. You must hold to your own name, your own body, your own reason for touching it. Carla muttered. This hospital needs a better employee handbook. Ethan almost smiled, then looked down at his wrist. The glow beneath the towel had formed the same thorned circle from the monitors, faint but steady. He removed the towel and let the room see it. Some nobles inhaled. Others bowed their heads. Seraphine looked like the sight hurt her. Ethan, she said softly, you have already done enough. He stepped closer to her, lowering his voice so only she and Mara could hear. If this can prove who hurt you, I am doing it. Not because they cornered me. Because whoever poisoned you also put every patient in this hospital in danger. Her eyes searched his face. Hold on to my voice, she said. If the memory pulls too hard, listen for me. Cashin placed the vial on the nurse's station counter like an offering. The truth stones brightened. Federal agents activated body cameras. Vampire witnesses raised their crystal shards. Human patients watched through narrow windows, silent and wide-eyed. Ethan reached for the vial. But the moment his fingers touched the glass, the lobby vanished. Cold rushed up through him. Not hospital cold. Palace cold. Marble beneath someone else's feet. Candlelight trembling against black crystal walls. He smelled winter roses, ink, and old dust. His hand was not his hand. It wore a silver ring shaped like a thorn. He saw Seraphine's bracelet resting on a velvet cushion in a private chamber. A voice whispered from behind him, low and familiar. She will run to the border when she weakens. Let the humans save her. Let the law damn her. Ethan tried to turn in the memory, but the vision dragged him sideways. A second hand entered the scene. pale, elegant, wearing a white armored glove with a captain's crest. Mara's crest. The lobby snapped back. Ethan stumbled, and Seraphine caught his arm before he hit the floor. Gasps erupted around them. Cashin's face shone with triumph. There, he said. The human has seen it. Captain Mara planted the poison. Every guard turned toward Mara. Mara stood perfectly still, horror breaking across her face. No, Ethan's head rang. The memory had shown her glove, her crest, her hand. It should have been enough. But something was wrong. The voice in the memory had not been Mara's. The hand had moved too carefully, like an actor imitating a role. And beneath the winter roses, Ethan had smelled something no palace chamber should have carried. Hospital antiseptic, sharp and modern. He gripped Seraphine's arm to steady himself, and the bond flared between them. The vision returned for one final heartbeat, clearer now because Seraphine was touching him. The white glove dissolved into an illusion, a glamour wrapped around another hand. A hand with a black signet ring. Cashin's ring. Ethan lifted his head. It was not Mara, he said, his voice rough but loud enough for the cameras. Cashin's smile froze. Careful, human. Ethan pointed at the vial. The memory was edited. The glove was a mask. And whoever made it forgot one thing. Director Hale stepped closer. What thing? Ethan turned toward the wall screen, where the hospital security feed still showed Cashin. Waiting outside before dawn, dry beneath the overhang while rain bent around him. The poison memory smelled like this hospital before the princess ever got here. Cashin handled the fragment after she arrived. He added the false image. The truth stones flashed violently, not clear, not red, but white, so bright the lobby filled with daylight before sunrise. The oldest witness staggered back. Tampered testimony. Seraphine released Ethan slowly and faced her uncle. The softness was gone from her eyes. In its place stood the princess every treaty feared. You did not come to expose betrayal, she said. You came to frame my captain, discredit my bond, and take my crown before the sun could prove you lied. Cashin's calm cracked at last, and outside, beyond the glass, every noble who had bowed in rain began to rise. Cashin moved first, but not toward Seraphine. He moved toward the cameras. That was when Ethan understood the shape of the trap had changed again. Cashin did not need to win the room if he could poison the world watching outside it. He lifted his black signet ring toward the ceiling, and every screen in the lobby flickered at once. The muted news banner above the vending machines vanished, replaced by a live image of Seraphine standing beside a human medic with a glowing mark on his wrist, Mara accused in the background, and Cashin framed perfectly beneath the hospital lights. Let the record show, Cashin said, his voice carrying through the intercom and out to every open feed, that Princess Seraphine has allowed a human bond to interfere with court evidence. Her so-called mate now contradicts blood memory itself. This is not justice. This is enchantment. The word enchantment hit the human officials like a spark in dry grass. Director Hale's face tightened. Federal agents reached for radios. Behind the fire doors, patients began whispering in fear. Ethan saw it happen in real time. Cashin did not have to prove Ethan was lying. He only had to make humans afraid that Seraphine had somehow controlled him. Seraphine saw it too. Her face went still in the terrible way a lake goes still before ice breaks. You are using human fear as a weapon, she said. Cashin spread his hands with elegant sorrow. I am protecting both worlds from a princess who cannot separate mercy from weakness. Mara stepped forward, no longer silent, no longer willing to let accusation hold her in place. You forged evidence against me. Did I? Cashin asked. Or has your loyalty become so complete that you would accept blame for her? The truth stones pulsed uncertainly, confused by a room full of fear, half-truths, and ancient power. Ethan felt the bond burn hot beneath his skin. Not pain. Warning. He leaned against the nurse's station, dizzy from the memory and from too many people deciding what his choice meant without asking him. Carla's hand steadied his elbow. Stay with us, she murmured. I am trying. Try harder. You are the only normal person in this mess. Ethan looked at the vampire nobles outside the glass, rising from their bows, waiting for permission to choose a side. He looked at the human officials, afraid of being manipulated. He looked at Seraphine, a royal woman who had spent her entire life being turned into a symbol until a night shift hospital forced everyone to see the person underneath. Cashin's weapon was doubt. Not a blade, not a curse, not anything that would leave marks. Doubt was cleaner. Doubt could look responsible on television. Ethan pushed himself upright. "Director Hale," he said. His voice cracked, but the room heard him. "Is this still a human medical facility?" Hale blinked, thrown by the question. "Yes. And am I still conscious, legally competent, and able to give a statement?" Cashin's eyes narrowed. Hale glanced at her tablet, then at the cameras. "Yes." Ethan nodded. "Then I want my statement recorded under human law, not vampire law." Seraphine turned to him quickly. "Ethan." He met her eyes for only a second, enough to feel the bond steady instead of flare. "Trust me." The words were small, dangerous, and somehow more intimate than anything the court had called a claim. Seraphine stepped back. Director Hale lifted her tablet. "Proceed." Ethan faced the cameras. He could see himself on the wall screen. Pale, exhausted, a hospital towel still hanging from one hand. Looking. Nothing like a consort or a criminal. Good. Let them see exactly what Cashin was trying to explain away. "My name is Ethan Vale. I am a licensed trauma medic at Blackridge Border Hospital. I was not enchanted. I was not promised money, rank, or protection. I gave blood because a patient was dying in front of me, and the people who knew how to save her were trapped by politics. If that creates a problem for ancient law, then ancient law can explain why it needed a human to do the decent thing." The truth stones flared clear gold. This time the light did not belong to Vampire Court alone. Director Hale's tablet chimed, federal verification seals appearing across the screen. Cashin took one step toward Ethan. "Pretty words." "No," Ethan said. "Plain ones." Carla smiled like she had been waiting all night for that. Ethan turned toward the oldest vampire witness. "You said the bond can reveal hidden betrayal. Can it reveal whether someone is controlling me right now?" The old witness hesitated. "If the princess permits bond examination and the human consents, yes." Cashin's jaw tightened. Seraphine understood instantly. "I permit it." Ethan held out his marked wrist. "I consent." Mara moved between them and Cashin, while the oldest witness raised his crystal shard. "No compulsion shall hide from first law." The shard released a ring of pale light that passed through Ethan's chest with the strange warmth of stepping into morning after a long winter. For one breath, the entire lobby saw what the bond held. Not commands, not chains, not Seraphine's will wrapped around his. They saw Ethan kneeling beside a hospital bed because a woman had asked not to be taken back. They saw Seraphine trying to refuse his blood to protect him. They saw the moment his choice became his own. Human patients gasped. Vampire nobles bowed their heads. Director Hale whispered, "Voluntary." The federal seals turned green. Cashin's live broadcast had become evidence against him. Seraphine stepped forward, and this time when she spoke, every screen carried her voice without distortion. "Lord Cashinvare, you accused my captain, forged blood memory, endangered neutral civilians, and attempted to use human fear to seize a crown you could not inherit with honor. I call for court judgment under first law." Cashin's mask finally broke. His expression twisted, not into rage, but into naked contempt. "You would give judgment to a law that chose him?" He pointed at Ethan as if kindness were an insult. A tired human with soft hands and no bloodline? Ethan looked down at his hands. There was antiseptic under his nails, a small clean mark on his wrist, and a tremor he could not quite hide. Soft hands, maybe. Hands that had still done what Cashin would not. Seraphine moved beside him. "Yes," she said, because he remembered what bloodlines are supposed to protect. The truth stones rose from the witnesses' hands on their own, floating in a circle above the lobby. Dawn pressed faintly against the eastern windows, turning the rain silver. One by one, the stones faced Cashin. The oldest witness spoke with a voice that seemed to come from beneath the hospital foundation. "Cashinvare, first law rejects your challenge." The glass doors unlocked. Not for Cashin to enter deeper, but for the nobles outside to step away from him. They did, all at once, leaving him alone beneath the overhang as the first gray light of sunrise touched the parking lot. Cashin looked toward his followers, but none met his eyes. Mara's voice cut through the silence. "By court order and treaty authority, you will surrender your signet." For a moment, Ethan thought Cashin would refuse. Then Director Hale raised her hand, and state troopers moved into view beyond the lobby. not threatening, simply present with the calm weight of human law. Cashin removed the black ring slowly and placed it on the wet pavement outside the threshold. The moment it left his finger, the red tint faded from the hospital lights. Patients behind the fire doors began to breathe again. Carla let out a long, exhausted sigh. I need a raise. Ethan almost laughed, but Seraphine touched his sleeve, barely there, a question instead of a claim. He looked at her, at the princess no longer dying, no longer alone, but still standing at the edge of a future neither of them had chosen cleanly. It is not over, she said. The court will accept the bond, but acceptance is not peace. They will want ceremony, terms, promises. Ethan looked through the windows at dawn breaking over the ambulance bay, at Cashin being escorted away without chains or spectacle, at vampire nobles bowing not to power alone, but to the choice that had exposed it. Then we give them terms, he said. Seraphine's eyes softened. What terms would a human medic demand of House Vare? Ethan glanced back at the fire doors where patients, nurses, and frightened families were watching the impossible become history under fluorescent lights. First term, he said, no one uses a hospital as a battlefield again. The truth stones, still floating above them, flashed once in approval, and outside, the sun finally touched the roof of Blackridge Border Hospital. By 6:18 in the morning, the rain had stopped, the hospital roof shone with sunrise, and the old vampire court stood in the ambulance bay of Blackridge Border Hospital because the human building had become the only place where the truth could not be hidden. Ethan stood just inside the glass doors with a blanket over his shoulders, a plastic cup of water in one hand, and the glowing mark on his wrist no longer hidden. It had changed since Cashin surrendered his signet. The harsh red circle had softened into a faint gold line shaped like a thorned crown, warm instead of burning, steady instead of demanding. Seraphine stood beside him in a borrowed black coat over her hospital gown, still barefoot on the polished floor, still pale from everything she had survived. Yet every noble outside watched her, as if the crown had already found its way back to her. Cashin had been taken into joint custody under treaty authority, not dragged away in spectacle, not destroyed for drama, but stripped of the thing he had used to twist memory. His signet lay sealed inside Director Hale's evidence case. The oldest vampire witness had spoken the judgment clearly for both worlds. Cashin had planted the bloodline poison, forged the memory fragment, accused Mara falsely, and attempted to force Seraphine from succession through fear of a human bond. The law he had tried to weaponize had rejected him in front of court, hospital staff, federal officers, and the cameras he had activated himself. That was the part Ethan found almost funny, if he had been less exhausted. Cashin had wanted the world to watch Seraphine fall. Instead, the world watched him prove why she needed to rise. But judgment was not the same as peace. The nobles remained outside the threshold, waiting for the final question, the one even victory could not avoid. The bond was valid. The poison was exposed. The challenge was dismissed. But Ethan was human. An ancient law could not make a free man into a royal consort unless he chose the road after knowing where it led. Seraphine knew that before anyone said it. She turned to him as sunlight brightened the ambulance bay and spoke quietly enough that the cameras could not steal the moment. The first law did not enslave you, Ethan. It recognized what you gave freely. My people turned blood into politics over centuries, but the oldest meaning is simpler. Life answered life. Protection answered need. Because you gave blood without bargain, the bond shielded this hospital and revealed the traitor. That is all it can do without your consent. Ethan looked down at the mark. So I can leave. Her eyes held his, crimson softened by dawn. Yes, you can return to your apartment, your sister in Denver, your terrible car, your ordinary life. House Vare will protect your name. I will tell the court you owe me nothing. The offer hurt more than any threat because he believed her. She would do it. She would stand in front of every noble who had called him contamination, every official who wanted a clean diplomatic file, every vampire who preferred symbols to people, and she would set him free even if it weakened her at the moment she had finally stopped being alone. Mara stepped forward then, no longer accused, no longer silent. Your Highness, the court awaits your declaration. Seraphine nodded but did not look away from Ethan. Then let them hear the truth. The glass doors opened, and cold morning air entered the lobby, carrying the smell of wet pavement, pine trees, and the strange winter roses that always followed her people. Seraphine stepped outside first. Ethan followed because he wanted to hear what she would say, not because the mark pulled him, not because the court demanded it, but because the choice had become clear in the quiet space after fear. The nobles formed a crescent beneath the pale sky. Some looked ashamed. Some looked curious. Some looked at Ethan as if he had rewritten a language they thought belonged only to them. Director Hale stood with the human officials on one side, Carla and the hospital staff on the other, and behind the fire doors, patients watched through narrow windows. Seraphine raised her hand, and every whisper died. House Vare stands because a human medic chose mercy when royal law chose hesitation, she said. Let the court record this clearly. Ethan Vale did not steal rank. He did not seek power. He did not bind me through ambition. He gave blood because I was dying, and because he saw a person where others saw a problem. The words moved through the nobles like a wind through dark trees. Ethan felt his throat tighten, but stayed still. Seraphine continued, stronger now. I accept the cost of my choice. If this court recognizes me as heir, it will recognize the bond by consent, not possession. No human within my territory will ever again be forced, traded, fed upon, or named lesser under cover of old custom. No hospital, sanctuary, or neutral shelter will be treated as a battlefield by my house. And if any noble calls Ethan Vale contamination again, they insult the blood that restored their princess and exposed their traitor. The silence after that was enormous. Then Mara drew her ceremonial blade, lowered it point down to the wet pavement, and knelt. One by one, the Vare guards followed. Then the oldest witness lowered his crystal shard. Then the nobles, even the ones who hated what history was becoming, bowed their heads because the first law had spoken and their princess had given it a future. Ethan stood in the middle of that impossible dawn, a medic in stained scrubs while an immortal court bent around him, and Carla whispered from the doorway, "That is going to be impossible to explain to payroll." He laughed then, small and breathless, and the sound broke the last of the terror in the air. Seraphine turned back to him, and only then did she ask in front of everyone, "Ethan Vale, free human of Blackridge, will you stand beside me as royal mate, oath-bearer, and living witness between our worlds? Not because blood demands it, not because court expects it, only if you choose." The whole court waited. So did the hospital. So did the morning. Ethan thought of ordinary life, and for the first time that night, ordinary did not feel like something he was losing. It felt like something he could bring with him, something this strange, ancient world desperately needed. He stepped forward and offered his marked wrist, palm up, not as surrender, but as answer. "I will stand beside you," he said. "But I keep my job, my name, and my right to tell your court when it is being ridiculous." Seraphine's smile was quiet, real, and worth every camera in the world missing it. Agreed. The mark on his wrist warmed once, gold light threading gently around Seraphine's restored bracelet, and the bond settled into peace instead of fire. No chains, no compulsion, a promise chosen twice. The nobles lowered their eyes in public recognition. The human officers recorded the new treaty terms. The hospital staff began unlocking doors, letting patients step into a world that had changed while they waited out the storm. By noon, Blackridge would be in every headline. By nightfall, House Vare would have a princess who had survived betrayal, a human mate who had earned his place without asking, and a new sanctuary law named for the hospital where blood stopped being a weapon and became a vow. As the sun climbed above the pine-covered border, Seraphine and Ethan walked together through the open ambulance bay doors, past the bowed court, past Cashin's sealed signet, past the line where fear had once divided their worlds. The gold mark on Ethan's wrist glowed softly in the daylight, not like a claim burned into him, but like the first warm light in a place that had been cold for centuries.